The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Avaloria Palace, as King Edmund stood before the tall windows of his private study. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he held the document that would change everything. The 65-year-old monarch had ruled the kingdom for 3 decades, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Crown Prince Alexander burst through the heavy oak doors without waiting for permission. His usually composed face showed signs of distress, and his dark hair was disheveled as if he had run through the palace corridors. Behind him, Princess Catherine entered more slowly, her emerald eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall. "Father, tell me it isn't true," Alexander demanded, his voice breaking. The 35-year-old heir to the throne had always been the picture of royal dignity, but now he looked like a lost child, seeking reassurance. King Edmund turned from the window, the morning light highlighting the deep lines on his face. He had aged 10 years in the past hour since receiving the sealed envelope from the royal archives. The keeper of records had discovered it while cataloging old documents, hidden away in a box that should have been destroyed decades ago. "I'm afraid it is true, my son," the king said quietly. He walked to his desk and placed the document carefully on its polished surface. "Catherine's mother was not who we believed her to be." Princess Catherine stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had married Alexander 5 years ago in a ceremony that the entire kingdom had celebrated. The people loved her for her kindness and grace, for the way she visited hospitals and schools, for how she made the crown prince smile in a way he never had before. "Your Majesty," Catherine began, her voice steady despite her tears, "I swear to you, I knew nothing of this. My mother died when I was 3 years old. Father told me she was from a minor noble family in the northern provinces." The king nodded slowly. He had no doubt that Catherine spoke the truth. Her shock was too genuine, her pain too real, but that would not matter to the royal council or to the laws that had governed Avaloria for centuries. "According to these documents," Edmund said, touching the papers with reluctance, "your mother was not nobility at all. She was—" He paused, struggling with words that would shatter their world. "She was a commoner who worked in the palace kitchens. More troubling still, she was married to another man when she began her relationship with your father." Alexander moved protectively to his wife's side, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as she swayed slightly. "This changes nothing," he said firmly. "Catherine is my wife, the future queen of Avaloria." But even as he spoke, all 3 of them knew it changed everything. The Royal Marriage Act, signed into law 300 years ago, was clear. Members of the royal family could only marry those of noble blood, and any marriage contracted outside these bounds was considered null and void. No exceptions had ever been made. "The keeper of records has informed Lord Pemberton," the king said heavily. Lord Pemberton was the head of the royal council, a man who valued tradition and law above all else. "By tomorrow morning, the entire council will know." Catherine pulled away from her husband's embrace, drawing herself up to her full height. Even in her distress, she maintained the regal bearing she had cultivated over the years. "Then we must act before they do," she said. "The people deserve to hear this from us, not from rumors and whispers that will spread like wildfire through the kingdom." The king admired her courage even as his heart broke for what was to come. The scandal would rock the monarchy to its foundations. The press would descend like vultures, picking apart every aspect of Catherine's life. The people who loved her now might turn against her when they learned of the deception, even though it was not her doing. "There's more," Edmund said reluctantly. He picked up another paper from his desk, this one bearing an official seal. "The private investigators Lord Pemberton hired have been thorough. They've discovered that Catherine's father, Duke Marcus, knew the truth all along. He forged the documents about his wife's noble heritage after her death." Alexander's face flushed with anger. "That man," he said through gritted teeth. Duke Marcus had passed away 2 years ago, taking his secrets to the grave, or so he had thought. He let Catherine believe a lie her entire life. He let us all believe it. He wanted a better life for his daughter, the king said quietly. "One can understand the motivation, even if the methods were wrong." He looked at Catherine with genuine affection. "You have been a wonderful addition to our family, my dear. Your work with children's charities, your dedication to the kingdom, none of that changes because of what we've learned today." But Catherine shook her head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Everything changes, Your Majesty." the legitimacy of any children Alexander and I might have, my position as crown princess, the faith the people have in the monarchy. All of it will be questioned now. She was right, and they all knew it. The kingdom of Avaloria had maintained stability for centuries by adhering to its traditions and laws. The monarchy derived its authority from that consistency, from the belief that the royal family was different, set apart, chosen by blood and divine right to rule. Alexander took his wife's hand, their fingers intertwining. "Then we'll face it together," he said. "I won't let them tear us apart." King Edmund watched his son with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Alexander had always been dutiful, always put the crown before his personal desires. But Catherine had changed him, had shown him that duty and love could coexist. Now that very love might cost him the throne. "The royal council will convene tomorrow," the king said. "They'll expect us to act according to the law. The marriage will be declared invalid, and Catherine will be required to leave the palace." "No," Alexander said flatly. "I'll renounce my claim to the throne before I let that happen." The words hung in the air like a sword ready to fall. King Edmund closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his crown more heavily than ever before. His younger son, Prince James, was capable, but untested. The succession had been clear and undisputed for Alexander's entire life. To change it now would invite chaos. "Don't make any rash decisions," the king counseled. "We have one day to find a solution, to present our case to the council. Perhaps there's a precedent we've overlooked, a way to interpret the law that allows for mercy." But even as he spoke, Edmund knew the chances were slim. Lord Pemberton and his allies on the council were strict constructionists. They believed the monarchy's strength lay in its adherence to tradition, not in bending to modern sensibilities. Catherine wiped her tears with the back of her hand, a gesture so unlike her usual composed manner that it made the king's heart ache. "I should leave," she said quietly. "If I go now, before the scandal breaks, perhaps the damage to the monarchy can be minimized." "Absolutely not," Alexander said fiercely. "You're my wife in every way that matters. I don't care what some dusty old law says, but the kingdom must care," Catherine replied. "We took vows not just to each other, but to serve Avaloria. How can we serve if our very presence undermines the institution we've sworn to protect?" The king watched the young couple he had come to think of as the future of Avaloria. Their love was real, their dedication to duty unquestionable, yet they were caught in a web woven centuries before their birth, trapped by rules that no longer seemed to fit the world they lived in. Outside, clouds began to gather, casting the study into shadow. The storm that had been forecast seemed an apt metaphor for what was to come. By tomorrow, the news would spread beyond the palace walls. The press would seize upon it, the people would take sides, and the quiet dignity the monarchy had maintained for generations would be shattered. "We'll call an emergency meeting tonight," King Edmund decided. "Just family and our most trusted advisors. We'll plan our response, decide how to present this to the council and the public. We may not be able to change the facts, but we can control how they're revealed." Alexander nodded, his jaw set with determination. "And we'll fight, father. For our marriage, for Catherine's place in this family, for the future of the monarchy itself, if necessary." The king saw his younger self in his son's defiance, remembered when he too had believed that will and righteousness could overcome any obstacle, but he had learned that sometimes the crown demanded sacrifices that broke one's heart. As the three of them stood in the darkening study, each lost in their own thoughts, the portrait of King Edmund's great-grandfather seemed to watch from the wall. King Harold had been the one to sign the Royal Marriage Act, believing he was protecting the monarchy from dilution and scandal. He could never have imagined that his law would one day threaten to tear apart a loving family and shake the kingdom to its core. The clock on the mantel chimed 12 times, marking noon. In 24 hours, the Royal Council would convene. By then, news of the crisis would have leaked, as palace secrets always did. The countdown to catastrophe had begun, and none of them could predict how it would end. By dawn the next morning, the palace gates were surrounded by hundreds of reporters from across Avaloria and beyond. News of the crisis had leaked during the night, just as King Edmund had feared. The headline of the morning edition of the Royal Gazette screamed, "Princess Catherine's hidden past threatens royal marriage." Inside the palace, Catherine stood at her window, watching the crowd gather. She had not slept, spending the night going through old photographs and letters from her father. Somewhere in those memories was a man who had loved his daughter enough to lie to the world, to forge documents and create an elaborate fiction, so she could have the life he believed she deserved. Alexander entered their chambers, carrying a tray of breakfast neither of them would eat. His face was drawn, showing the strain of the emergency meetings that had lasted until 3 in the morning. The family's most trusted advisors had debated fiercely, but no clear solution had emerged. "How bad is it?" Catherine asked, without turning from the window. "The council is divided," Alexander admitted, setting down the tray. "Lord Pemberton has 5 firm votes for annulment. We have 3 who support us. The remaining 4 are undecided, waiting to see which way the public sentiment flows." Catherine finally turned to face him. She wore a simple dress, having abandoned the elaborate gowns that marked her as crown princess. "The public that once loved me will feel betrayed. They'll say I'm a fraud, that I've been deceiving them all along." "You are not responsible for your father's actions," Alexander said firmly. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "You are the same woman who established literacy programs in rural villages, who personally oversees the children's hospital funding, who makes me want to be a better man and future king." A knock at the door interrupted them. Prince James entered, the king's younger son looking uncomfortable in his formal military uniform. At 32, James had always been content to serve in the Royal Navy, far from the pressures of direct succession. Now he might be thrust into a role he never wanted. "The council convenes in an hour," James said. "Father wanted me to tell you that Lord Pemberton has called for a public hearing. He says the people deserve transparency." Alexander's face darkened. "He wants a spectacle. He knows that public pressure might force Father's hand even if the council vote goes our way." James shifted awkwardly. "There's something else. The press has found Catherine's mother's family. There's a woman claiming to be her cousin, saying she has photographs and letters that prove the kitchen worker story." Catherine sank into a chair, her composure finally cracking. The careful construction of her life was crumbling, and each new revelation was another blow. Alexander moved beside her protectively while James stood uncertain near the door. "I should tell you both," James said quietly, "that I support you completely. I never wanted the throne, and I certainly don't want it like this. We're family, and family stands together." Meanwhile, in the palace's great hall, servants hurried to prepare for the unprecedented public hearing. Television cameras were being set up, chairs arranged for the kingdom's most prominent citizens. Lord Pemberton supervised with grim satisfaction. He was 70 years old, a man who had served 3 kings and believed deeply that the monarchy's survival depended on maintaining its mystique and exclusivity. Outside the palace, the crowd had grown to thousands. They carried signs and banners, some supporting Princess Catherine, others demanding adherence to royal law. The kingdom was dividing before their eyes, and social media amplified every voice, every opinion. "Catherine saved my daughter's life," one woman told a reporter, tears streaming down her face. "She personally ensured my girl got the treatment she needed when we couldn't afford it." "I don't care who her mother was," but another citizen disagreed vehemently. "The law is the law," he declared. "If we start making exceptions, where does it end? The royal family is supposed to be special, different from the rest of us. That's why they rule." Inside the palace, King Edmund prepared for the hearing with a heavy heart. His advisors had worked through the night, searching for precedents, for any legal avenue that might save his son's marriage. They had found historical examples of flexible interpretation but nothing definitive enough to counter Lord Pemberton's strict reading of the law. Queen Margaret, who had remained silent during the previous day's revelations, finally spoke as she helped adjust her husband's ceremonial robes. "Perhaps it's time for the law to change," she said softly. "The world has moved on from the prejudices of 300 years ago." "The council will never agree to that," Edmund replied. "They'll say we're changing the rules to suit our personal desires, undermining the very foundations of the monarchy." "Then perhaps those foundations need examining," the Queen said with uncharacteristic sharpness. "I've watched Catherine these 5 years. She has more royal bearing in her little finger than some who were born to titles. Birth doesn't determine worth." As the hour approached, the royal family gathered in the antechamber outside the Great Hall. Catherine had changed into a navy suit, professional but not ostentatious, She held Alexander's hand tightly as they listened to the crowd noise filtering through the ancient walls. Prince William, Alexander's cousin and close friend, approached them. As a member of a cadet branch of the royal family, he had no vote on the council, but considerable influence among the younger nobility. "Whatever happens in there," William said, embracing them both, "know that you have allies. Many of us believe the monarchy must evolve, or risk becoming irrelevant." Lord Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his formal robes making him look like a figure from another century. "Your Majesties, your Highnesses," he said with a bow that seemed mocking in its precision. "The council is assembled. The kingdom waits." As they entered the great hall, Catherine was struck by the sight. Hundreds of faces turned toward them, some sympathetic, others hostile, many simply curious. The television cameras tracked their every move, broadcasting the drama to millions across Avaloria and beyond. The royal council sat at a raised table, their faces grave. Lord Pemberton took his position as council president, gavel in hand. The other members arranged themselves according to ancient protocol, their ceremonial chains of office glinting in the light from the stained glass windows. "We are gathered here," Lord Pemberton intoned, "to address a matter of utmost gravity. Evidence has been presented that Princess Catherine's maternal lineage fails to meet the requirements set forth in the Royal Marriage Act of 1725. We must determine the validity of her marriage to Crown Prince Alexander, and, consequently, her status within the royal family." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. King Edmund took his seat at the center of the council table, his crown a physical reminder of the weight he bore. Alexander and Catherine were directed to chairs facing the council, positioned so that the cameras could capture every emotion that crossed their faces. Lord Pemberton presented the evidence methodically: the forged documents, the testimony from the newly discovered cousin, employment records from the palace archives showing Catherine's mother working in the kitchens. Each piece of evidence was another stone in the wall he was building between Catherine and her royal status. When he finished, he turned to the crowd. "The law is clear. For 3 centuries, it has protected the integrity of our royal bloodline. To ignore it now would be to say that laws only matter when convenient, that tradition can be discarded at will." The crowd erupted in mixed reactions. Some shouted support for the princess. Others called for upholding the law. The cameras captured it all, beaming the division across the kingdom. King Edmund raised his hand for silence. "Lord Pemberton speaks of law and tradition," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his office. "But let us also speak of the woman who stands accused of nothing more than being born to a mother who fell in love above her station." He stood, moving to face both the council and the crowd. "For 5 years, Catherine has served this kingdom with distinction. She has brought compassion to the crown, accessibility to the aristocracy. She has shown us that worth is not determined by blood but by action." Lord Pemberton's face remained impassive. "Your Majesty's personal feelings cannot override the law. If we make an exception for sentiment, we undermine the very foundation of monarchical authority." It was then that Catherine stood. Alexander tried to hold her back, but she gently freed herself and moved to face the council. The hall fell silent, everyone straining to hear what the woman at the center of the storm would say. "My lords and ladies," she began, her voice clear despite her evident emotion. "I came to this family believing I knew who I was. That belief was false, built on my father's deception. But my love for Prince Alexander, my dedication to this kingdom." She paused, looking directly at Lord Pemberton. "You speak of protecting the monarchy's integrity. I ask you, what integrity is there in punishing me for my father's actions? What integrity is there in telling the world that bloodline matters more than character? That accident of birth outweighs years of service?" The crowd was riveted. Some wiped away tears as Catherine continued. "If the council decides our marriage is invalid, I will accept that judgment, but I will not accept that my work, my contributions, my love for this kingdom and its people, count for nothing, because my mother once peeled potatoes in the palace kitchens." She turned to address the crowd directly. "To those who feel betrayed, I apologize. I never meant to deceive you. To those who support me, I am forever grateful. But to all of you, I make this promise. Whatever happens today, I will continue to serve Avaloria in whatever capacity I am allowed." As Catherine returned to her seat, the hall erupted. Some stood and applauded. Others remained seated in stony silence. The council members exchanged glances, some clearly moved by her words, others maintaining their stern expressions. Prince Alexander stood next. "Members of the council, citizens of Avaloria, I have something to say." His voice carried the same authority as his father's. "If you annul my marriage, you should know that I will immediately renounce my claim to the throne. I will not rule without Catherine by my side." Gasps echoed through the hall. King Edmund closed his eyes, having feared this moment but knowing his son too well to be surprised. Prince James looked stricken, realizing that the crown he never wanted was about to be thrust upon him. Lord Pemberton's composure finally cracked. "Your Highness, you would throw away centuries of preparation, of duty, for personal feelings?" "I would choose love over a loveless throne," Alexander replied. "I would choose integrity over hypocrisy. If this monarchy cannot accept that worth comes from character rather than bloodline, then perhaps it's time for someone else to lead it into the modern age." The kingdom held its breath. The live broadcast showed crowds gathered in town squares across Avaloria, watching on giant screens as their future hung in the balance. The hashtag numbers "Stand with Catherine" trended globally, while traditionalists rallied behind number royal law matters. Lord Pemberton called for order. "We will now hear from council members who wished to speak before the vote." One by one, they rose. Some spoke of tradition and the danger of change, others talked of evolution and the need to remain relevant. The debate was passionate but civil, each member aware that history was watching. Lady Margaret Worthington, the newest and youngest member of the council at 45, delivered perhaps the most powerful statement. "My lords and ladies, we stand at a crossroads. We can cling to laws written for a different world, or we can show that monarchy can adapt while maintaining its essential character. Princess Catherine has proven herself through deed, not birth. Is that not what we should value?" As the debate continued, Catherine felt Alexander's hand squeeze hers. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The fairy tale might not end as planned, but their love was real, tested by fire, and proven true. The great clock tower of the palace began to chime, marking the moment for the vote that would determine not just their fate, but possibly the future of the monarchy itself. Lord Pemberton stood with the weight of centuries on his shoulders. In his hand, he held the paper that would announce the council's decision. The great hall had fallen into absolute silence, broken only by the distant sound of the crowd outside and the quiet whir of television cameras. "The Royal Council has voted," he announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "By a count of 7-5, the council has determined that the marriage between Crown Prince Alexander and Princess Catherine." He paused, and in that pause, Catherine felt her world suspended. Alexander's grip on her hand was almost painful, but she welcomed the connection to him in what might be their final moments as husband and wife. "Shall be subject to a special review," Lord Pemberton continued, his words surprising everyone. "The council recognizes that while the letter of the law appears clear, the spirit of the law, to protect and strengthen the monarchy, requires deeper consideration." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the hall. This was not the decisive verdict everyone had expected. King Edmund leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since the crisis began. Lord Pemberton raised his hand for silence. 4 council members have proposed an unprecedented solution. Given Princess Catherine's exemplary service to the kingdom and the clear evidence of public support, we will convene a special commission to review the Royal Marriage Act itself. The hall erupted. Some shouted in anger, others in jubilation. Lord Pemberton's gavel rang out repeatedly as he fought to restore order. Furthermore, he continued when quiet finally returned, "During this review period, which shall last no more than 6 months, Princess Catherine shall retain her titles and position. The commission will include members of the council, representatives from Parliament, constitutional scholars, and importantly, citizens chosen from across the kingdom." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was hope. Beside her, Alexander's rigid posture relaxed slightly, though his face remained guarded. Lord Pemberton's expression showed his personal disagreement with the decision, but his sense of duty compelled him to continue. This decision was not taken lightly. Council members were swayed by several factors: the unprecedented public support for the princess, the changing nature of our society, and the very real threat to the succession, should Prince Alexander follow through with his stated intention to abdicate. He looked directly at Alexander. "Your Highness, The council trusts you will not make any rash decisions during the review period. Alexander stood, helping Catherine to her feet. The council has shown wisdom in recognizing that times change, even if traditions endure. I will await the commission's findings, but my position remains clear. Catherine is my wife, and I will not abandon her. King Edmund rose, his relief evident. The Crown thanks the council for its measured approach. This commission offers us an opportunity to examine not just one law, but how the monarchy can best serve Avaloria in the modern age, while honoring our heritage. As the formal session concluded, the hall buzzed with conversation. Television commentators struggled to explain the unexpected outcome to viewers across the kingdom. The compromise had satisfied neither hardliners nor reformers completely. But perhaps that marked it as truly fair. In the private family chambers an hour later, the royals gathered to process what had happened. Catherine sat surrounded by those who had become her family, still wearing her simple suit but somehow looking more regal than ever. 6 months, Queen Margaret said thoughtfully. Much can happen in 6 months. Public opinion can solidify. Commission members can be influenced by reason and compassion. Prince James, still in his military uniform, raised a glass of champagne. To Catherine, who faced down the entire establishment with more courage than any soldier I've commanded, and to Alexander, William added, who showed us all what it means to put love before crown. Catherine finally allowed herself to smile. To family, she said softly, both the one we're born into and the one we choose. Over the following weeks, the kingdom watched as the commission began its work. Town halls were held across Avaloria, giving ordinary citizens a chance to voice their opinions. The stories that emerged surprised even Catherine's strongest supporters. In a mining town in the north, an elderly man stood up and spoke of how Princess Catherine had personally ensured his granddaughter received specialized medical treatment in the capital. In a fishing village on the eastern coast, a teacher described how the princess's literacy program had transformed their school. Story after story painted a picture of a woman who had touched lives across the kingdom. The commission also heard from historians and legal scholars. Professor Elizabeth Hartwell of the Royal University presented research showing that the Royal Marriage Act had been modified twice before, though the changes had been quietly made and largely forgotten. The monarchy has always adapted, she told the commission. Queen Anne modified the law in 1802 to allow marriage to foreign nobles previously excluded. King George made changes in 1889 to accommodate colonial titles. The precedent for evolution exists. Meanwhile, Catherine threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. If she had 6 months to prove her worth to the kingdom, she would make every day count. She expanded her children's hospital program, launched a new initiative to preserve traditional crafts in rural communities, and continued her regular visits to schools and community centers. Alexander worked beside her, and their partnership became even stronger through adversity. The press, once divided, began to shift in their coverage as they saw the couple's dedication. Photos of them comforting flood victims in the western provinces or celebrating with young students who had overcome learning disabilities told a story more powerful than any royal bloodline. Lord Pemberton, despite his personal views, fulfilled his duty as council president with integrity. He ensured the commission heard all perspectives, even those that challenged his own beliefs. In private moments, he found himself watching the young couple and wondering if perhaps the world had indeed changed more than he had allowed himself to see. 3 months into the review period, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The palace archives yielded a letter written by King Harold himself, the author of the Royal Marriage Act. In it, he expressed private doubts about the law's rigidity. I fear, the king had written to his confessor, that in seeking to protect the crown, I may have built a cage that future generations will find too small. May they have the wisdom to expand it without breaking it entirely. The letter became a sensation. Here was the law's own author acknowledging its potential flaws. Support for reform grew stronger, though traditionalists argued that private doubts did not invalidate public law. As the commission neared its final deliberations, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news, which should have been purely joyous, carried additional weight given their uncertain status. Would this child be considered legitimate? Would he or she have a place in the succession? Alexander's protective instincts went into overdrive, but Catherine refused to hide. Our child deserves to be celebrated, not hidden away like a shameful secret, she told him. Whatever the commission decides, this baby will be loved and valued. The pregnancy announcement touched the public in a way that legal arguments could not. The image of a potentially stateless royal child, punished for circumstances beyond anyone's control, seemed to crystallize the human cost of rigid tradition. Finally, the day of decision arrived. The commission had deliberated for 6 months, hearing from thousands of citizens, dozens of experts, and wrestling with the balance between tradition and progress. The kingdom held its breath as Lord Chief Justice Blackwood, head of the commission, prepared to deliver their findings. The great hall was packed once again. But the atmosphere was different from 6 months earlier, where there had been division and anger. Now there was anticipation and hope. Catherine, now showing her pregnancy, sat with Alexander, their hands intertwined as they had been throughout this ordeal. After extensive deliberation, Lord Blackwood began. The commission has reached several conclusions. First, we find that the Royal Marriage Act, while well-intentioned in its time, no longer serves the best interests of the monarchy or the kingdom. A collective gasp went through the hall. Even those hoping for reform had not expected such a direct statement. Second, he continued, we find that Princess Catherine has demonstrated through her actions, character, and service that worth cannot be determined by birth alone. To reject such a devoted servant of the kingdom based solely on her mother's status would be to diminish the monarchy, not protect it. Catherine felt Alexander's arm go around her shoulders as Lord Blackwood continued. Therefore, the Commission recommends immediate amendment to the Royal Marriage Act. Going forward, marriages within the royal family shall be judged on the character, conduct, and commitment of the individuals involved, not solely on their ancestry. The hall erupted in celebration. Even some who had initially opposed change found themselves swept up in the moment. The kingdom had chosen progress while respecting its past. Furthermore, Lord Blackwood said when order was restored, the Commission specifically affirms the validity of the marriage between Crown Prince Alexander and Princess Catherine. Their unborn child shall have full rights of succession. Catherine could no longer hold back her tears. Alexander pulled her close, and for a moment, they forgot about the cameras, the crowd, the weight of history. They were simply a couple who had fought for their love and won. King Edmund stood, his voice thick with emotion. The Crown accepts the Commission's recommendations. Let it be known that the monarchy of Avaloria evolves with its people, that we value character over birthright, that love and service matter more than ancient prejudices. Lord Pemberton, his duty to the process complete, surprised everyone by approaching Catherine. The stern traditionalist bowed deeply. Your Highness, he said formally, I may not have agreed with changing our traditions, but I cannot deny your grace throughout this ordeal. You have earned your place here. As the celebrations continued, Catherine found a quiet moment to step onto a balcony overlooking the kingdom. The crowds below cheered when they saw her, but she barely heard them. Instead, she thought of her mother, the palace kitchen worker who had loved above her station, and her father, who had loved his daughter enough to risk everything. Alexander joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently on her growing belly. What are you thinking? He asked softly. That love really can change the world, she replied. It just takes courage to let it. Prince James appeared beside them, grinning widely. Does this mean I definitely don't have to be king? Because I've gotten rather attached to my naval career. They laughed, the tension of months finally releasing. Below them, the kingdom celebrated not just the resolution of a crisis, but the birth of a new era. The monarchy had proven it could adapt without losing its essential character, that it could honor both tradition and progress. In the months that followed, the amended Royal Marriage Act opened new possibilities for the younger members of the royal family. Some chose partners from noble families, others from common backgrounds. Each choice was judged on its own merits, on the character and compatibility of the couples involved. Catherine gave birth to a daughter, Princess Emma, who would grow up in a palace where worth was measured by deed rather than blood. The child would know her whole story. The kitchen worker grandmother, the grandfather who lied for love, and the parents who fought to change centuries of tradition. Years later, when Princess Emma was old enough to understand, Catherine would tell her, You come from a line of brave women who dared to love beyond boundaries. Your great-grandmother loved across class lines. I fought to stay with the man I loved, and you, my darling, will have the freedom to love whomever your heart chooses. The portrait that would eventually hang in the palace gallery would show the moment of triumph. Catherine and Alexander, embracing in the great hall as the commission announced its decision. But those who knew the story would understand it represented something greater. The moment when love conquered law, when character triumphed over circumstance, and when an ancient monarchy proved it could change without breaking. The kingdom of Avaloria had weathered its crisis and emerged stronger. The crown had bent but not broken, adapted but not abandoned its core purpose, and at the center of it all stood a woman who had never expected to be a princess but had shown everyone what true royalty meant. As the sun set over the palace on the day of the commission's decision, casting golden light through the same windows where King Edmund had first learned of the crisis, the royal family gathered for a private dinner. The conversation was light, filled with laughter and plans for the future. The storm had passed, and in its wake, they had found not just resolution, but renewal. Catherine raised her glass of sparkling cider, her eyes meeting each family member in turn. "To new beginnings," she said simply. "To new beginnings," they echoed. And in that moment, the future of Avaloria had never looked brighter.